Jan and Jillian Yuhas, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you for having us.
It's a real pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from Dallas. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about conflict resolution, boundary maintenance, navigating team conflict, things like this in relation to your recent book. And I'm really thrilled to have a chance to sit down with you and to have this in-depth conversation, about how to be productive in the modern workplace while balancing conflict and conflict resolution. As we get started, I wanted to share Jan and Jillian's bio with everybody. Jan and Jillian Yuhas are conflict and communication strategists and international best-selling authors of Boundary Badass. They specialize in helping business leaders and teams master communication that transforms conflict into growth opportunities, cultivates psychological safety, and develops resilient organizations rooted in calibration and trust. I love everything about that. What a wonderful topic. I'm thrilled to have a chance to sit down with you. Anything you would like to highlight by way of your background or personal context before we dive on in?
Sure. She and I are identical twins, and we kind of have the same background. She and I both have our masters in marriage and family therapy. And so we've taken interpersonal dynamics to a professional level as well in regards to solving interpersonal conflict within the workforce. And we're also certified mediators as well. Yes.
Awesome. Anything you want to add to that?
Well, we've also gotten certified in body language, micro expressions, deception detection, which all of those things also play a role in today's communication and conflict as well. So things that often get missed or pushed aside are also things that play a role in how conflict plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we really dive on into the topic kind of broadly, generally, I also like to ask authors why did they write these books? Why these books? Why now? They're a labor of love. They take a lot of time, energy, and perseverance, to get out there into the world. So what was it about this book at this time for you?
I think when she and we grew up in a rural farm town of 900 people. We
Oh,
moved to a metropolitan city of 3 million, and that became a huge culture shock for us. And where we grew up, our word was as good as gold. We always had integrity. We received it
yeah.
from whether it was our parents, neighbors, whoever. That was just kind of the culture of small town life. When we went to a huge metropolitan city for undergrad, that basically opened up our world to a whole new way of how other people operate and their perspective and how they grew up. And so our boundaries or the mutual respect that we're used to receiving back home was not as received
Mm,
as well. And so she and I had to learn to articulate our needs from a place of value rather than emotion. And in our first entrepreneurial endeavors, that's where we developed our boundary formula in order to manage clients in that business. And that's kind of how it just kept evolving. And then also within our personal dynamics as well.
Yeah, and I think too, a lot of times people think boundaries, especially in a trauma-informed situations, they think they can tell people what to do or demand people to not do something, where for our boundary method, it's all about this we mindset. How can we co-create mutually beneficial agreements that are going to sustain and maintain that partnership or relationship dynamic? Which is really effective for teams or business partners or people who have to work with someone else in a work environment.
yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I have to just say I can relate at least to some extent, though I grew up in a town of 1,700 people, and so that's a booming metropolis compared to your 900. But yes, moving from small town rural into, big city urban is different, isn't it? And then you can go to to different parts of the country that have their own kind of culture and style, or different parts of the world, different big cities around the world. Every place is different, right? And so then you
Right.
have to reassess, readjust how
Mhm.
you establish your boundaries, how you establish and maintain trust. And I really wanted to double click on that trust piece really quickly because that is like the foundation to everything, isn't it? Like if you want to be able to have productive conflict resolution, if you want to have healthy relationships, if you want to be able to build collaboratively and collectively with others, it only happens as you have a strong foundation of trust and something that maybe you and I took for granted a bit growing up in a small town, all of a sudden becomes something you have to be very deliberate about, something very intentional about creating and maintaining, and then dealing with it when trust is broken, right? And how do you respond to that? So anyways, I can relate to what you're saying.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you definitely understand that because obviously it is a huge shift in the terms of how you show up, how you communicate. And I think too, it's very easy for us to trust someone, but once it's broken, it's so much harder to gain back. And that's where
Yeah.
it takes often a lot of work because there's resentment that builds up, betrayal, rejection, all these wounds that sort of gets triggered. And so then all of a sudden we're stuck in that pattern or cycle. And then it's much harder for us to get around it. But when we're in our ego, it's our emotional state, often we need to shift it to more of a heart-centered logical state, which really allows us to transform that dynamic that works for both parties.
And often it's normally when we're working with whether it's teams, entrepreneurs, where we help them establish their top 5 values to operate from, because our emotional trigger is the opposite of the value. So if we're feeling ignored or we
Mm.
feel that we've been betrayed by somebody, the opposite of that trigger or wound is the value that we need to set our boundary on, such as trust or integrity or communication. So those 5 values become our roadmap in terms of how we operate within the integrity of our business or our teams.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. That's a really wonderful way to think about it. And I have to admit, I think I'm probably still, in part because I grew up in a small town. I don't know. But I think my default is to just kind of trust. I just approach pretty much everyone that I meet from a place of trust. I'm assuming good intentions. I'm assuming, that this is something we can work together. We can accomplish X, Y, Z, whatever. And it's come back to bite me many, many times, when I'm kind of defaulting to trust. And then people either know that and take advantage of it, or people are just human, right? And kind of fall down and maybe don't respond in the way that I would hope they would respond. And anyways, it can make it hard. And then I can find myself becoming cynical, or I can find myself becoming, frustrated or discouraged around that. Um, and yes, are there other people at times that misbehave or mistreat me or things like that? Sure. But it also comes back to me, and it comes back to how I approach folks that I work with and how I establish those boundaries. And if I don't do that proactively, then I think it's inevitable that you're going to have these types of dynamics play out where trust is going to, um, uh, let's say, at least be challenged on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I think this is where often we teach people to assess the situation prior to setting a boundary. So asking open-ended questions such as discovery questions
Mm,
really allows you to gain insight into those concerns or the disconnect or discord, whatever's causing that disruption or disconnect in the relationship. And so when you assess and ask questions, you're gaining farther insight in terms of how you're going to position or negotiate into resolving that problem. Because often, sometimes the other people aren't even aware that they've maybe
yeah.
violated a personal boundary of yours or violated the relationship in a way that's not conducive to a collaborative, team atmosphere.
Yeah, and again, I think that, that's kind of my default assumption is that people typically aren't waking up in the morning, trying to think, how am I going to take advantage of folks and manipulate and, undermine my colleagues and blah, blah, blah. Like most people don't do that. I mean, there are folks that do, I suppose, but most people don't do that. Most people, if there's a mistake, it's not intentional. And it just means that it's an opportunity to have some open conversation, right?
Yeah, we're just bridging the gap into different perspectives of how the situation is being handled.
Yeah, and I can think to, some experiences that I've had in the last couple of years, with folks who I would say really, really wronged me, like really eroded and even completely demolished trust that I had with them. And when those things happen, you have a choice of how you're going to respond to it. I'm thinking of one specific experience where I know the guy, he's a good guy. I don't think there was any necessarily malicious intent. I think there is negligence, and things like that. But I don't think it was malicious. And so, and we had a bit of a, an emotional bank account set up, like we had, worked together before, things like that. I could have just been pissed off. I could have just been like, screw him. I'm never working with him again. I could have done a whole bunch of things like that. And I think a lot of people would have said that's a completely reasonable response. But I valued our relationship, like our ability to work together on projects, and we've done some cool things together in the past. In my mind, this had been an egregious issue that needed to be addressed, and so I just tried to proactively, reach out to him and say, "Hey, I, you know, this is what I'm feeling. This is, how this impacted me. This is my perspective. That this is how I hope we can move forward." And just had an open dialogue with him. It was a bit uncomfortable, right? Trying to just shoot straight and be honest. But the outcome was we were able to work through it, like we were able to better understand each other. He was better able to understand what had happened and why it had impacted me the way it did, what he needed to do differently in the future, those sorts of things. And we were able to move forward in a productive way. And none of that would have happened if I would have done, I think, what was my natural inclination to just like whatever, not work with them again, maybe badmouth them to other people, whatever, like just do those sorts of things, which I think is a human response, but it's not necessarily a productive response.
Right. And I think a lot of times when we're trying to address disconnects with other individuals, we need to focus on like the bigger disconnect or the behavior that we're experiencing rather than attacking that person. I think a lot of people, if they get frustrated or they have enough resentment build up, they'll start to attack the person rather than the disconnect within the relationship that's occurring. And it's just two different people coming from two different worlds. And we're trying to, like I said, find that common ground so we can productively move forward in a way that everybody's on the same page.
But I like the fact that you sort of mentioned like you're very proactive and assertive and just went ahead and said like this is how I feel, this is what I think, using those I statements, which is really effective versus saying you did XYZ or you did that, and that person's immediately going to shut down and not receive what it is that you're trying to address with them. And so I think often being in that responsive voice versus the reactive is
Yeah.
very important when we are trying to discuss disconnects or address them. It really allows the other person on the receiving end to be actively listening and open to suggestions. And I think though too, sometimes we have to redefine the relationship in a way that feels safe for us to
Sure.
continue. So it doesn't mean we have to get rid of that person and maybe we forgive them in a certain way, but maybe we redefine it how we show up or how we engage with them so it doesn't impact us negatively, but there still can be some kind of connection in future interactions or projects.
Yeah, and in this particular example too, I think, I'm sure I didn't handle it all perfectly, but one thing I think that was good that I did was that I didn't allow it to just build and fester. Like I could have, you know, uh, kind of tried to ignore it, been passive aggressive, whatever, and then something else happens a little bit further down the road, things erode further. And I didn't want that to happen. Like I wanted to one, I believe in trying to be a mature adult and like having conversations with folks. And so, like when it happened, I addressed it and fairly immediately, so that it could be responded to and not allow it to fester in my own like ruminations and that kind of stuff and to just move forward, right? And it's so easy. And I've certainly been guilty of this. It's so easy to get frustrated, allow that resentment to build, ruminate endlessly on stuff. And, you may have very good reason for being upset or, all the things that are causing the ruminations, but just being caught in that cycle isn't doing you any good. It's not helping you move forward in a healthy, productive way either. So acknowledging what has happened, creating or maybe reestablishing, reasserting certain boundaries, keeping yourself safe, of course, is always important. Um, and also keeping in mind that, you can, be a grown adult, who can have hard conversations and face hard things and move forward productively.
Yeah, I agree. And I think with us being communicators and in the field that we're in, we're more likely to approach situations when they do arise. But someone who might be conflict avoidant, they might shy away from addressing situations head on the minute that they do happen. And a lot of times conflict avoidance, whether it's that can go back to our attachment style in the home that we grew up with and how conflict was dealt with in the home. And that can play out in our professional dynamics as well in the workforce. And so a lot of times if someone has conflict avoidance, they could either have, more that avoidance attachment style, or they have more the anxious or they're people pleasing. And so they just want to keep the peace all together. And so when they get into people pleasing or appeasing sort of patterns, then that's where the festering and the rumination starts to happen if we don't address things right away.
Well, I think too, on that note, there's a lot of people who are compliant, like you said, and they will automatically just give a yes to keep the peace, even though they're creating an internal war within inside themselves, which then can lead to passive aggressive behavior, communication down the road, because they're just trying to keep the peace and they're protecting their position within their team or at their company. And so often people are very fearful because if they feel like if they do speak up, then their job could be put on the line because they're going against potentially what's the norms within the cultural environment, even though at the same time, every employee, leader, executive deserves to have a voice and a choice when they are within an environment. And that's what creates that psychological safety where people should be able to speak up without repercussions or punishment.
So I'm curious how you approach, when working with clients on how to productively move forward with conflict resolution, while working to maintain onward momentum and productivity. Like it certainly can be super disruptive, right? When you have conflict, and it can erode trust, and that can cause, toxic environments and interpersonal and team dynamics, and all sorts of negative things can potentially come about. On the one hand, on the other hand, it actually can be a real building opportunity. And coming back to this example I gave just a minute ago, I actually think, while there was trust eroded and boundaries reasserted and things like that. And in some ways, I've learned, okay, I'm not going to work with this individual in this particular way in the future, but there's more clarity both ways, right? And I think overall, like we're better for it. Overall, we understand each other better. Overall, I think we respect each other more. I think we deepened and further grew our professional, collaborative relationship through having those conversations, right? And so when managed effectively, I think, while it might slow you down in the short term, dealing with those types of things, in the long term, actually, it can lead to all sorts of things, positive, productivity growth and whatnot. But that's a hard thing, especially if someone's in the emotional stage of just like dealing with the conflict. How do you approach that when you're working with clients?
So helping them see like what needs to truly be focused on the facts and what is the goal or the outcome you're hoping to achieve. I think trying to remove that emotional component allows us to more likely streamline communication and productivity. So that way we can actually get to the results. Because otherwise we can sit here and go in circles and talk about how it's disruptive and creating all this chaos, but at the same time, getting out of that emotional state is really key to helping you focus on what needs to be done. And so focusing on, where does the problem lie? Is this been going on for a long time, or has this been something that's recently been brought up? What's also adding two layers of that conflict, and who are the main players? And then what is your role in that conflict as well, if you're involved, or how are you supposed to, what is your role in terms of resolving it too, if you're a leader? So I think really focusing on the different components and parts is the first part. And then also coming up with those discovery questions. How are we going to assess this and get to the root cause so we can actually get to the results that we're trying to achieve?
Yeah. Um, what are some of the strategies that you have leveraged in the past, or you found to be most effective when diffusing tense situations kind of in the moment? You don't want a total like nuclear bomb going off, as it relates to the team or company culture. And real issues do arise and have to be dealt with. And so there are tensions, there are hurt feelings, there are those sorts of things. Um, you know, getting clear on your goals, trying to separate the emotion, all those are really great. Other thoughts on other strategies or ways, especially as a leader, if I'm in this environment, I'm not the one in conflict, but I'm observing it, it's my team. Like, how do I start to proactively diffuse that?
Well, that's where discovery questions, as I previously mentioned, come into play because you're assessing the situation and you're asking, how can we, or what, or where, or share more about this, help me understand. But we never want to use why questions because why questions put people on the defense and they're going to feel judged immediately and more likely shut down. So
Mhm.
it's really honing in on those questions because that's going to help you position where you need to go with this conversation and know what are your potential opportunities or possibilities. Because if we don't have the answers, we will not know how to navigate and get sort of that mutually beneficial agreement that we're trying to achieve with team members or with leaders or whoever we're speaking with in that moment.
And discovery questions allow each person to feel heard and understood, which is one of the most, I get human components that people really want to feel. If they feel heard and understood and they have a voice, then they're more also going to be open to hearing another person's perspective as well. And so discovery questions allow us to hear everybody's perspective in order to try to resolve the disconnect in the relationship, but also indirectly guide the conversation to where we want it to go in terms of getting a resolution on the table. And so you might explore each person's perspective, but then also you're exploring viable options of solutions on how are we moving forward, such as if there's a disconnect in how like the deadline of a team project, someone is always done early, someone always is like delaying the team, the time management becomes the value, becomes the focus of the disconnect. And so we're striving towards how are we going to get everybody to their behaviors around time management and assess that to set the boundary moving forward in the agreement.
Yeah, and coming back to this idea of trust as a foundational component to all of this, I love using questions, doing it. And by the way, maybe it goes without saying, but you have to do it genuinely and authentically. Like you have to do it
Oh
to
yeah.
really listen, to really understand, right? You
Oh
can't
yeah,
just ask.
absolutely.
You can't just go through the motions. People can tell the difference, right? But assuming you're doing it all, genuinely, and you're really trying to understand, you're truly really trying to assess, um, not only are you going to gain lots of great information that's going to help you, understand the context and be in a better situation to deal with things. But like you said, that human component of feeling, of being needed, wanted, valued, being heard, is so essential. And one of the best ways to diffuse high emotions, like giving someone an opportunity to just express like what they're feeling, to recognize, to understand that, their needs are being heard by you, and that there's going to be proactive efforts made to resolve the situation. Like that's going to if it's done genuinely and with real intent, like it's going to foster more trust between you and the people on your team. And then of course you'll better understand the context in such a way that will enable you to respond in a more effective manner. So that open communication piece is essential to having good trust and to build that and maintain that over time. And whenever I work with leaders or go into organizations and I see broken down communications, almost always there is trust erosion nearby, like associated with it. And again, it's not necessarily bad intentions. Like it's like, I don't think this does happen, but like most leaders aren't sitting there thinking, how am I going to hoard information and keep and be, non-transparent and keep everything for my people and like make everyone's lives miserable because they have no idea what's going on or how things are being responded to. Like almost nobody approaches it that way. People understand that good leadership requires good communication, trust requires openness and transparency. People understand that, but it's not always easy to do consistently. And some of us are, sometimes better or worse at it, depending on where we're at, in our own headspace or our own personal context. And so really doubling down on and committing to, I'm going to like over communicate. I'm going to really try my best to listen to understand. I'm going to try my best to share necessary, relevant information with others. And we're going to create a culture of psychological safety, open dialogue. All of that is just going to create such a better atmosphere of trust amongst your team so that when hiccups do arise, because they will, because we're all human and we all have different backgrounds, we all have different ways of approaching things, hiccups will arise, but you're just way more resilient in the face of conflict when that foundation is there.
I agree. Like conflict's inevitable, but you have a choice of how you're going to address it or how you're going to approach trying to get to like the end goal. And I think ultimately it's about really truly understanding each person and understanding their perspective. And often too, the most quiet person usually has the best ideas, especially when they're asked, would you approach this? When they're sometimes pushed to the back end or the back of the room, whatever, and they don't feel like they have a voice, but often they come up with things because they are the creators, the way that they think and process information. So I think too, it's like really allowing people to advocate and speak in a way that is conducive to overall mutual respect, which is where that trust and the transparency, honesty, all those values that people hone in on is what's going to also lay the foundation for company growth to come.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, this has just been a really fun, enlightening conversation. I note the time. I need to let you go here in just a minute. But before we wrap things up, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, how they can find out more about your work, where they can find your book, and then give us the final word for today.
Yeah. So you can find us at 28consultancy.com, or you can follow some of our latest articles on Substack at High Stakes Conversations. And our book, Boundary Badass, is over on Amazon in all formats.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, to get connected, find out more about what you can do for them and check out the book. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week.